Welcome to each of you to the Monte Vista Grove Homes Weekly Convocation Hour. We're grateful to the Residents Association for supporting convocations and to the San Marino Community Church for sharing with us. Today is Tyler of their digital ministry. The digital ministries at San Marino Community Church facilitates our program on Zoom, and we're very appreciative. Today's scripture is from Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12, verses 3 through 8. For the grace given to me, I bid everyone among you not to think of her or himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith which God has assigned him or her. For as one body, we have many members, and all the members do not have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. Those who teach, in their teaching. Those who exhort, in their exhortation. Those who contribute, in liberality. Those who give aid, do with zeal. Those who do acts of mercy, do so with cheerfulness. Thanks be to God for this message. Our gifted resident, Rebecca Thompson, has inspired and delighted us with her exceptional introduction to the Glory to God hymnal. She has guided us in seeing hymns as a basis for community devotion and individual prayer. For the spoken prayer today, I'm using the refrain and second and fourth verses of the hymn, Spirit, Spirit of Gentleness. Let's pray together. Spirit, Spirit of gentleness, blow through the wilderness, calling and free. Spirit, Spirit of restlessness, stir me from my placidness, wind, wind on the sea. You swept through the desert, you stung with the sand, and you goaded your people with a law and a land. When they were confounded with idols and lies, then you spoke through your prophets to open their eyes. You call from tomorrow, you break ancient schemes. From the bondage of sorrow, the captives dream dreams. Our women see visions, our men clear their eyes. With bold new decisions, your people arise. Amen, amen. Today, it's my paternal joy and pleasure to introduce our son, Chris Mathieu, who came with his family from Sweden to celebrate the marriage of his younger brother, Rob, to Milan Hung. Our eldest son, Jim, and his family came from Seattle for the 3-day celebrations. Chris left California to study for his master's degree in African Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, then on to Lund University in Sweden to study for his PhD, where he has been teaching since 1993. He's Associate Professor of Work and Organizations, Sociology of Art, and coordinator of the European Sociological Association Research Network on Sociology of the Arts. Today's presentation is based on a most recent publication titled Disability and Arts Education: From Unequal Participation to Opportunities for Innovation. Thank you, Chris, for being here today.
Thank you all for the invitation to come. I think this is the first time that my mother has introduced me for an academic presentation, so it's a great honor. And you can see I sort of follow in the line of my parents. So my younger brother became an engineer and got all the musical talent. And my older brother is also an engineer and keeps drinking water in people's pipes and I get to do research on interesting topics as a sociologist. So today I'm going to talk about a project that I and some colleagues have done on disability and access to arts education in Sweden. And it's kind of constructed as an academic presentation. So there's some tables on that. So I hope you bear with me if this is a little heavy on the academic side, but hopefully the topic is of interest. So I'm going to share with you some PowerPoints. Can you see the presentation? Yes. Okay, the title for the presentation, like my mother introduced, is Disability and Arts Education from Unequal Participation to Opportunities for Innovation in Arts Education. And we were three researchers who were engaged in this. Two of us were engaged in the initial research project, and the three of us wrote the paper together. And I was talking to Ron White just before the convocation, and he asked me about international students at Lund University, and I said that there's about 35% international students. All three of the people who are listed here, Gürkan Kaya is born in Turkey, did his PhD in Lund. I was born in Los Angeles, did my PhD in Lund, and Marie Sepulcra is from Belgium. And she did her PhD in Uppsala, where Gürkan is at the moment, but has now become a faculty member at Lund University. So those are the three researchers. Gürkan is a sociologist of education and a master statistician. I do primarily research on the sociology of the arts, and Marie Sepulcra has been doing disability studies for a number of years, did her PhD dissertation on disability and disabled rights movements in Lund. So I'll begin. So this is an overview of the presentation. So we'll give you some background to the article that we've written, tell you a little bit about our orientation towards arts education, then talk about disability and arts education in Sweden, and then we'll go through the findings, the data and the methods for the study that we've done, and then talk about some of the conclusionary points that we draw in the article. So this article is based on some commissioned research in Sweden. Each one of the counties in Sweden is responsible for education and then also responsible for arts promotion. So the county of Skäne, which is the region that I live in, the major city is Malmö. This is the very southernmost county in Sweden, asked Gürkan and myself to do an analysis of a previous study that is done on the health, mental and physical health, and activities of all the students in all the schools in this county in grades 6, so that's primary school, grade 9, which is the last year of middle school, and then grade 11, which is the first year of, or the second year of high school. And the first high school is not obligatory in Sweden. So you can go through 9 years of study and then not go on to high school if you choose not to do that. So this survey is done for all the students in this county in Sweden in the 6th grade, in the 9th grade, and then those students who choose to study in 11th grade. And in this survey, they asked primarily about health, physical health, mental health, and physical activities. But in the survey that they did in 2016, they actually asked some questions about cultural participation. So this was the last major survey before COVID. So the survey is distributed in the schools. So this is pretty much the most comprehensive survey of school children in Sweden, but it's done on a county basis. But being that they wanted to include some extra questions on culture, they wanted some sociologists of the arts in order to analyze this. So we wrote a report for the county government, and basically what we found were things that when the county government Department of Culture asked us to do the survey, they thought that they would find that the students who did arts and had high arts participation would actually have better mental and physical health than the students who didn't. But we found that there really wasn't much of a difference. But one of the things that we found has to do with access, and kind of a fairly startling finding. And that's what I'm going to talk about this. And so when we found that certain groups with disabilities were almost entirely excluded from arts education or participating at a much lower level, the county government actually decided that they needed to do something about this. So this report that we wrote actually has had an effect in increasing funding and trying to increase participation among students with disabilities in arts education. But then COVID came. So this whole new project for increasing participation of students with certain kinds of disabilities in arts was kind of put on hold, and it really hasn't started up again yet, but hopefully we'll see sort of some of the positive results from what we've studied taking through. So there is an English language version of this article, or which has been published in an Italian journal called Scuola Democratica. My Italian isn't all that good, but that has come out. And if you would like a copy of the article, I think my parents have it, or you can contact me and I can send you a PDF of that article. So that's the background history to this, the study that we've done. With regard to arts education, we really have this very strong belief that arts education need to be valued in and of themselves. And we found this wonderful quote by two arts education researchers, Winner and Hetland. And they argue that sort of we don't need the arts in our schools to raise mathematical and verbal skills. We already target these in math and language arts. So we need the arts because in addition to introducing students to aesthetic appreciation, they teach other modes of thinking that we value. For students in a rapidly changing world, the arts teach vital modes of seeing, imagining, inventing, and thinking. In a lot of the literature and a lot of the policy debates about arts education, you usually read that arts education are important because they increase or they improve math or mathematical thinking. They increase or improve language skills and communication skills. But there's been a lot of research on, well, do arts education really provide these actual benefits? And in the academic literature, sort of they get mixed results. But there's a lot of people who are doing research in the arts field who think that this way of arguing for arts education and arts appreciation as something that supplements or something that helps science and technology and maths and natural sciences and language and communication really undercuts the arts. And so a lot of the people who sort of I work with in the Sociology of the Arts network really sort of want to try to move away from seeing the arts as something that's supplementary to what is the true value of the arts and having that recognized. And again, sort of at the end of this quote, there is this idea that sort of the arts do provide different ways of seeing, thinking, conceptualizing, seeing the world, seeing yourself, and that's really what needs to be lifted up. But there are other discourses about the arts education, which have to do with the rights to arts, and UNESCO in a declaration in 2006 on arts and education stated that the arts and access to arts education is a universal human right. But again, sort of with lots of universal human rights, whether these are fulfilled or not, are usually up to state, local governments, or sometimes up to sort of parents and communities to promote these. And what we find, especially in studies for students with disabilities, is that they lag far behind other students with regard to access to the rights to education. And then there's another argument sort of going beyond rights, and that is that sort of societies need to harness and need to cultivate the talents of all of their citizens, regardless of ability, so that societies to be free and equal and truly democratic, they need to be inclusive. And this means inclusiveness regardless of ability and disability. And this needs to include recognition and development and appreciation of the variety of artistic and creative talents that all students or all citizens have. And one way of sort of cultivating this is through arts education. And then there's a further argument that we also make, and that is that trying to increase inclusivity gives us the opportunity to rethink how restrictive the arts classically have been. So the arts are always about seeing opportunities, always about seeing things in alternative ways, about reaching inwards and outwards with expression. And this very basic impulse within the arts is something that we can actually use to rethink arts education. And again, sort of one of the things that we usually find is that sort of artists think sort of very expansively, very expressively, very inclusively. But when arts get put into an institutionalized educational setting, that's where an awful lot of the inclusiveness, the innovativeness, the expansiveness falls away. So in the article, we really try to debate sort of how we can actually open up arts education to increased opportunity, especially for persons with disabilities or functional variations, as we also express it. So with regard to disability, there's also sort of a very specific theory that we draw upon. And again, it's Marie Sepulcre, who's sort of the expert on disability theory. And that is this idea that disability really is a relational phenomenon or a relational situation. Nobody is categorically or universally disabled, but we all are disabled based on the context and the situations that we're put into. So this has to do with this relational dimension. And if you can change the parameters, you can change the opportunities for different people to participate in different ways. So this relational model really looks at sort of how society creates barriers for different members of the population. And again, sort of by removing barriers, you increase inclusion and increased participation or opportunities for participation. So when we look at how disability in arts education has been looked at over time, usually there's this emphasis on access, sort of creating access for people with disabilities to be able to participate. And access is extremely important. That's one way of getting in, but one of our arguments is that the sort of access is not enough. There has to be expressed appreciation, and there also has to be, again, sort of this idea of sort of different relational interactions between the institutional environment and the students, between teachers and students. So again, sort of this idea of just sort of lowering thresholds and sort of not really understanding the entire context really isn't enough. There's also usually a discourse associated with access about different forms of ableism, sort of what kinds of abilities people have, and oftentimes, sometimes it's expressed in the way that certain people actually don't have the ability to do things. And then the opposite, or sort of this sort of relational model says, well, ability is something that's socially created. It's created by what the people around this person do and make how they create a situation where these people actually can participate and actually can gain some kind of self-appreciation and appreciation from the environment. And then there's also another movement called universal design. And universal design is really trying to sort of sink all kinds of barriers to the lowest common denominator for participation. So you have universal design in healthcare, you have universal design for learning, and it really comes out of different kinds of ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics and physical ergonomics, and trying to really find sort of what are the most sort of the least exclusionary ways of facilitating people to actually be able to participate. So here, there's also this quote from Glass about this idea that arts have one way of thinking, but then sort of schools and educational systems have another way of thinking. So Glass and co-authors say that when music or any kind of art is constrained by the limits of what is normal or average, it becomes a narrow kind of art, a very restrictive art. And the arts may have always understood this and try to sort of expand the arts, but oftentimes schools haven't. So again, sort of we're looking at two different environments. One is the artistic environment, the artistic impulse, and the other one is the often institutionalized educational environment. So in Sweden, the music and arts, there's been a long tradition of trying to make them more accessible for especially students with disabilities, and then also an emphasis on trying to sort of teach teachers how to meet students who have different kinds of disabilities. But again, sort of the question is, and what we actually tried to investigate in this article was, okay, well, what is the actual status of access? And again, sort of access is easier to measure than any of the other parameters statistically, and that's what we had based on this survey. So these other questions about what kinds of competencies teachers need, that needs to be addressed subsequently once we understand sort of, well, what are the barriers to participation for students with disabilities. So again, sort of this survey was a survey of 27,000 plus students. again, sort of in grades 6, 9, and 11, and 27,000 students might not sound like a lot in Los Angeles Unified School District terms, but this is sort of a very, very large survey. And again, it takes about 75% of all of the school children in these 3 different classes have responded to this. So it's actually sort of a very, very comprehensive and sort of very reliable data, but everything is self-reported by the students. So the students actually sort of fill in these questionnaires themselves to the best of their knowledge. So what we find, or sort of what we're the different kinds of disabilities that are categorized in this survey are hearing impairment, visual impairment, mobility impairment, dyslexia, and ADHD, ADD. These are attention deficit syndromes. And then there's a category for other kinds of disabilities. And then sort of a very large category is students with chronic illnesses. And then there are students with development disorders and autism. And again, in Sweden, there was a movement towards trying to integrate students, or sort of trying to maximize the number of students who could actually participate in regular schooling and regular teaching, rather than having them in special schools. So this is why you'll see sort of a number of students, not with severe autism, but sort of more to, was it the right of the autism spectrum, sort of actually participating in schools. So again, sort of these will be students sort of with impairments that do not prohibit them from participating in regular schools. So these are not special school classes. These are the students who are integrated into the regular school system. So the first column that you see under N, that's the number of students in Skäne out of these 27,000. And then you'll see the percentages of females with these different disabilities. So there are more males with hearing impairment, more females with mobility impairment. And again, sort of more males with attention deficit syndrome, a lot more males, and a lot more males with autism as well than females. And then there is no real question about social or socioeconomic class, but there is a question about how much education your parents have. And at the lowest level is parents with only schooling up to schooling up to 9th grade. And then there's a response rate, or a response with parents who have some, or one parent has some university education. And then at the sort of the high end is students who have 2 university educated parents. So here you can see that about a third of the students with disabilities have parents with 2 university educated parents, but this is usually below the average. So in the total sample of the students, about 40% of the students have parents with 2 university educations. And again, sort of the students with disabilities usually or have slightly less than 2 university educated parents. And then sort of the average age, again, sort of it averages the students from 6th grade, 9th grade, and 11th grade. So they're pretty much in the same age range, so that you don't see sort of age cohorts sticking out very much. So that's the kind of the demographics of the students with disabilities that we're looking at. And then the other thing that's the other sort of major categorical parameter is what kinds of artistic participation or arts and culture participation is it that we're actually looking at. And the first column, institutional culture, has to do with students having access to going to films, theater, and concerts. So that's attendance and attending arts and cultural activities. And then painting, drawing, and writing is students who are given the opportunity to actually create art. And again, this is primarily visual arts, painting and drawing, but also creative writing. So here they mix two art forms, which we as sociologists would have liked to have seen those separated. But this is the way that the survey is constructed. The column in the middle has to do with music, playing and making music, playing instruments in schools. And then the third column is, again, sort of mixing different kinds of art forms. And this is blogging, writing blogs, which is kind of self-expressive, and then photography and filming as well. So that's another kind of artistic stream in schools. And then going to a library, and this is going to a library outside of school. So this is not visiting the school library, but this is visiting the public libraries. And again, sort of public libraries in Sweden are used as cultural points, so that sometimes there'll be visual arts exhibitions, sometimes there'll be lectures at libraries. So going to a library can entail sort of borrowing books and reading books, but it can also entail sort of doing other kinds of activities at the library. And then reading for pleasure is a final activity that's covered in this survey. So here we have the different forms of disability, and then here we have the different artistic and cultural activities that students are involved in. So in the next slide, we see, based on the average participation of students, who is involved in what kind of activities. So the more blue, the higher the participation is for these students. The closer you get to mustard or sort of dark yellow, the more excluded you are from certain kinds of activities. So what we find here, if you read this, for my mother and I both have dyslexia. So we see that students with dyslexia, they participate at an equal level with their fellow students who do not have dyslexia, but they participate far less than their colleagues in painting, drawing, and writing, playing music, writing blogs, photographing, and filming, going to libraries, and reading for pleasure. So for some of this sort of reading and writing things, you would think that might make sense. But then other things which are more visually oriented, they're also sort of, they participate less than their colleagues to a great extent than their colleagues who don't have dyslexia. But the thing that really shook the politicians and sort of the regional policymakers was what we found with regard to attention deficit syndromes and sort of cognitive neurological disabilities, is that across the board, they were disadvantaged. So again, sort of the students with attention deficit and other cognitive and neurological diagnoses like dyslexia sort of led to these students being excluded across the board, and sort of much higher in different kinds of institutionalized activities, such as going to the library and attending films, theater, concerts, and that. But also things like even playing music and writing and photography. So again, sort of the level of exclusion suffered by students with neurological and cognitive impairments was strikingly high. So here we find sort of two segments that are sort of greatly disadvantaged, but we also find situations with students who have visual impairments where they are almost overcompensated, where they are given the opportunity to participate in certain kinds of arts and cultural activities to a much greater extent than their fellows. And the interesting thing is that with regard to visual impairment, you see that painting, drawing, and visual arts are the kinds of things that students with visual impairments are actually given greater access to. So there is this overcompensation. And we find this both with painting, drawing, and writing, but also with another of the major visual artistic categories, and that is photography, filming, and blogging. So basically what we found is that students with hearing impairments, they are neither sort of overcompensated or excluded. Students with visual impairments are given greater opportunities to engage in visual artistic educational activities. Students with mobility impairments are really only slightly disadvantaged with regard to reading for pleasure, which doesn't really logically make sense. But they participate sort of pretty much with at an equal level as their colleagues without mobility impairments, and then are slightly privileged with regard to sort of photography and filming. And then we see sort of the students with neurological, ADHD, cognitive, and attention disorders who are sort of blatantly excluded. And then the students with chronic illnesses are also sort of, the blue means highly overcompensated or sort of participate at a much higher level than others. And students with developmental disorders in 4 of the 6 categories participate on equal basis with their colleagues, and then to a slightly less extent in 2 of the categories. And then students with autism sort of more excluded even than the students with attention deficit syndromes from attending films and concerts and theater, but again sort of overcompensated with regard to their colleagues with regard to sort of painting and drawing and writing, and again sort of going to the library and reading for pleasure. Sort of children with autism are participate on an equal footing. But then again, when we compared sort of students with autism, highly sort of disadvantaged with regard to one kind of institutionalized activity, but with regard to going to the library, sort of participate on an equal footing. So something very interesting is happening here, which probably has a lot to do with labeling of students. what kinds of activities are appropriate and inappropriate for different categories of students. And again, sort of there doesn't seem to be a discernible logic behind this, because things get mixed and matched across disability categories and across artistic education and participation categories, without really sort of being able to say, okay, well, here we see sort of a logical sort of development or a logical trajectory. So the key points are that we find some students are sort of highly excluded, and these are especially students with attention deficit syndrome and dyslexia are more or less consistently excluded across all 6 categories of artistic educational opportunities. Then we also find what we see as compensation, and these are the disabilities where there is sort of some blue aspects in the previous slide, which show that certain students are compensated for not being able to participate in certain kinds of educational activities, but they're given greater opportunities to participate in others. And again, sort of, we also see that certain students, especially students with visual impairments, are given privileged access to different kinds, or sort of almost all types of artistic educational opportunities, regardless, or sort of this seems to be sort of if you could talk about a privileged group of students with disabilities. And again, sort of the interesting thing will be to see that this only has to do with arts, education, and cultural participation, but there might be other aspects of extracurricular activities, such as sports, or sort of, especially in Sweden, walking in nature or exploring nature, that are given to different kinds of students. So that's beyond what we've actually looked at. So there might be other ways in which students with disabilities are compensated beyond the arts sphere, which is what we've concentrated on. So basically what this does is this gives us an opportunity to see sort of how students with disabilities are treated in different kinds of environments, are treated in terms of cultural consumption versus cultural production, or artistic consumption and artistic production. But basically what it also invites us to do is to look at sort of how we categorize students with different kinds of disabilities, and based on these categories, how we channel them into different kinds of activities, or we hold them back from different kinds of activities. And so this hopefully will give us an idea that sort of we should be rethinking arts education, sort of again, sort of from not what's wrong with the students, but what's wrong with the way that we present and facilitate access and facilitate appreciation and expressive opportunities to the students. So again, it's this matter of sort of looking at what's wrong with the way we do arts education, and why we have certain exclusionary tendencies. So thank you very much. I think we have 15 minutes for questions. I'm sorry for taking so much time, but
we do have one question in the chat here from Betty. It is, can you clarify your dependent variable? Was it choosing to engage or being given access to engage?
It is actual participation. So it's both sort of being given access and then choosing. So it's the students actually saying, I participate in this sort of on a weekly basis, or sort of on a monthly basis for some of these activities. So it's actual participation. And then what gets compared is the participation rates for students with different kinds of disabilities versus the population of students without disabilities.
Are you also parceling out whether or not those opportunities are available to the students themselves, or are all of those things considered available?
All would be considered available based on the national curriculum, or sort of, so everybody should be given the opportunity. So basically, in an ideal world, you would see sort of equal participation and no variation based on disability or non-disability. But again, sort of what we see is that some of the students who are given more opportunity to participate, that means they're probably doing something less. So they might be sort of channeled into these for some reason or another. But that we were really able to look at that. So basically the only thing that we could see is sort of this compensation or under participation.
Thank you.
More questions in the chat here from Tom. This one's actually kind of a combo. First is, can you comment on the political and educational trajectory in Sweden? Do you think it is moving in the right direction? Compound that with, is music therapy an endeavor in Sweden as well?
Yes, there is. Sweden is fairly good at special education. I hosted a conference on the sociology of the arts recently, and I was talking to one of the colleagues from Italy with regard to special education and music therapy and then sort of arts therapy. And there is a high degree of awareness. And again, sort of if you're to be critical, the problem is that arts therapy and special education is sort of, it's held by the specific experts and the special educators, and it's not really spread to the normal classroom teachers. And that would be sort of the second step, because you have sort of students with a wide range of abilities and functional abilities in the classroom. And so that would be the next step, is to try to get this, what we would call mainstreamed, or out to the to the everyday teachers and not to the special education teachers or the arts and music therapy teachers. With regard to whether education in Sweden is going in the right or the wrong direction, from an arts and creativity perspective, things pretty much have been going in the wrong direction for the past 15 years, with sort of an extreme emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and maths, trying to sort of make sure that sort of all students are heavily exposed to those subjects. And again, sort of this has, to a certain extent, been to the deficit of arts, but it's also been to the deficit of other kinds of history and social science subjects at the 1 through 9, the primary and secondary school. At the high school level, you can choose. It's kind of like the magnet school system. You can choose different lines, and there you see a lot of students still choosing aesthetics and arts educations at the high school level. But sort of, yeah, Sweden really is sort of going towards, or sort of for the past 15 years has been moving more and more towards natural sciences, mathematics. But again, sort of the nice thing is the students seem to be resisting that. And still choosing literature, still choosing arts, still choosing aesthetics when they get to the high school level.
Can I be heard? Am I muted or unmuted?
We hear you, Ron.
I hear you. Okay, very good. Tell us more about, you say students can end their education in the 9th grade. What percentage of students then go on to be in high school?
Probably about 80%.
Oh,
Or 85%, I think. And Sweden has kind of this typical European two-tiered high school system. They have some high schools which are oriented towards occupational skills, becoming an electrician, becoming a sort of electrician, plumbing, but also becoming nursery school teachers. Which only really demands a high school education and high school certificate. So an awful, or sort of, again, sort of the education policy is to try to get more and more students going into theoretical university preparatory high school. And that's happening to a larger and larger extent. So over 80% would go to high school, and then some will sort of choose the occupational high schools, some choose university preparatory high schools, and then some students do drop out of high schools.
if I could follow that up, we are experiencing in this country for the last 10 years, the number of students in liberal arts, just take English, is plummeting greatly. I once taught in the history department at UCLA that had 72 professors. Now it has 40.
Oh.
So I learned yesterday that there's a new major in university, supply chain management. This is becoming what is being done. People are spending lots of money, parents. So what's the bang for the buck? You got to get a job, Sally or John. And so the study of English, history, philosophy is on the wane in our country. What is happening in Sweden?
At the moment, university education used to be fairly restricted and fairly privileged.
Yes.
But about 30 years ago, they began sort of expanding university education. So now, pretty much regardless of what kind of degree you have, so long as you have a university degree, you get a job and you get a good job. So I teach sociology, and sort of sociologists go out and get sort of good, well-paying, oftentimes sort of administrative jobs and civil service jobs, kind of across the economy. So having a university education is important, and that's kind of your ticket to sort of full employment and lifetime employment, because once you get into employment, there's a lot of emphasis in Sweden on what do you call education when you're in employment? Continuing education, or sort of, yeah. So there's a lot of money invested by companies in sort of personnel development, and
Training their employees.
yeah, training of employees and skill improvement. So that's sort of, as a sociologist who work in occupations, sort of that's one of the things that I see is sort of really, really important, is sort of just getting in, and then sort of the employers, whether the public sector or private sector, they see to it that you have the skills to be able to sort of advance your career. So kind of the university education is important, so that there is this concern about students who drop out of high school without either occupational skills or university preparatory skills. And usually there's some kind of social or mental health problems involved. And again, sort of that's another problem with the Swedish education system, is that there is so much emphasis on getting good grades, getting into the right high school programs, getting into the right university, that's causing sort of an awful lot of stress and amongst high school students, but I think that's a global phenomenon.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'd like to just make a comment. If you'll permit me to share a childhood experience, which seems to be relevant to this discussion. When I was in the 3rd grade, we had an assignment from our teacher to draw a horse. And I thought I'd drawn a pretty fine looking horse until my teacher picked up my picture, held it up to the class and said, "Does anyone else in this classroom think this looks like a horse except Barbara?" And I decided at that moment that art was probably not my forte. And I never took another art class. Not that was 3rd grade. It wasn't an art class, but I never took an art class ever. And it wasn't until I was applying to UCLA graduate school that I thought I had to improve my reading speed. And I took the best course I could find. And at the end of it, I hadn't improved 1 word per minute. So they did a little bit of exploring and said, "Oh, you have dyslexia." But not that I was given any direction following that. But, I think that's kind of, I was self-limiting myself, obviously, but I was sort of mortally embarrassed in the classroom.
And so now you know that aside from a lot of love from my mother, I also probably got my dyslexia from her as well. So we've done pretty well for ourselves. So, but it's always good to have these kinds of challenges. So it makes me more receptive to the kind of research that I'm doing and gives kind of an insider perspective. And Gurkan also has dyslexia. So when we started talking about sort of our own disabilities, but he became a statistician, so stay away from text. He likes numbers.
Doctor, any
Because I got my blur.
advice or any more comments regarding the aspect of stress and how you as an educator try to deal with the kind of the omnipresent aspect of stress in the field of learning and educating youngsters?
Yes, and sort of one of the interesting things is the 2 most prestigious educational lines or educational programs in Sweden and Lund University. One is the clinical psychology program. The other is the medical program, sort of to become a doctor. All of the courses are just pass-fail. There is no grades. So this is one of their ways of sort of eliminating this competition about grades. So if you perform to a level that's sort of satisfactory, that's it. And so you don't get the same kind of competition that you get in other programs and sort of other programs around the world where sort of it's always the top grade. And it's always sort of trying to sort of get that final sort of 0.5%. So I think that's one of there's also sort of class-based bases for why this is the way it is. But I think that's really the way to go. But then again, sort of I talked about the reforms over the past 15, 20 years. And that was introducing a steeper gradation because Sweden used to have sort of a high pass, a pass, and a fail. And that was the sort of the primary way of doing it. And now they have A, B, C, D, E, and F. so that you have what, 5 passing grades and 1 failing grade, and that increases stress. So students are not just worried about sort of passing the course, but they're also worried about sort of getting these extra grades that they think are going to be extremely important in the end. But basically what I tell all of my students, sort of first year undergraduate students, is sort of, yes, read, participate in discussions, but as long as you get your degree, sort of, you'll have a good life. So yeah, you don't need to stress about that. But this is really sort of going further and further down to the primary schools. Sort of, I think that before 6th grade, you never got grades, letter grades in Swedish schools, and now they're sort of lowering the level at which you get sort of these gradated A to F grades. So that creates stress. And everybody's worried about getting a job. Everybody's worried about getting a good job. And now everybody's worried about getting a job that you can actually buy a house on. So
Christopher, thank you so much. Your presentation has been very enlightening and relates to some members of our family, and I appreciate it. We appreciate it very much. You are reaching now, next year, it will be 30 years teaching in your position at the university. Do you have any personal reflections on teaching in Sweden and so forth? By the way, we want to say you have a wonderful mom and dad, so that speaks well for you too.
that I'm aware of. That is.
Yeah, we do.
Again, sort of, it's not the same country I moved to, and I think that almost anybody can say that. And yeah, and a lot happens over 30 years. But sort of the quality of life, and I have 3 children, and I don't think that there is a society that I would like them to have grown up in more than Sweden. Again, sort of my scope is sort of heavily lived in sort of Zambia, Lesotho, the United States, the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Sweden. And I still think sort of the quality of life, the quality of education still is, I mean, I probably still would make that choice now, despite the current government. But we'll see, yeah, how things proceed. But thank you all for inviting me, and thank you to my mother, and I see my father's out there too, so wave to him as well. So, but nice to have met you all, and yeah, you can always contact me through my parents, or they can write me an email if you'd like to discuss anything. So thank you all very, very much.
Well, this has been really a pleasure for me, because it's the first time I've actually been able to hear my son lecture in something other than Swedish, and I don't speak or understand Swedish. So this was a treat for me. He sometimes would send me lectures or notes, but it was something I could not understand. Thank you for being with us today. And I invite you all to come back next week. This is always a special occasion when we interview our new residents. So next week we will get to hear about some of our very special new residents here. And we wish you all a very good week until then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.